Dear friends, my name is Victor Pinchuk. Thank you that you are here for our traditional Ukrainian breakfast discussion. Behind me, you see the work of Ukrainian artist Nikita Kadan from the series Repeating Speech. And here is original of this work. I acquired it at an auction to get drones for the 93rd Brigade of Ukrainian Armed Forces. This was in April 23, almost a year ago. You see the work says, "Stand with Ukraine," but these words are written so many times that it gets difficult to recognize them. A statement is made again and again, and then it means almost nothing. And you know, big artists, they can predict future and talk about future and explain future a little bit better than everybody else, even than politicians. And this work of April 23, it describes our situation today. Let me explain. Now Ukraine's international partners support us with a lot, really a lot. And Ukrainians are so grateful for this, and we will never forget this. But I want to say one difficult truth to you. In war, it does not matter if you did a lot. It matters only if you did enough, enough for victory. Will our international partners produce and give enough weapons to push out the aggressor? And at this moment, behind the many deliveries that happened, and behind all statements of support, stands the big answer: no. Ukraine will have too little weapons to win. And time is running out. International partners must now make strong decisions to supply all necessary weapons as much as possible and quicker, or it will be too late. We are at the critical point. As an engineer, I like simple formulas. Simple formulas help to understand the situation better. I would say like this. Year 2022 was the year when everybody underestimated Ukraine and was surprised by the strength of Ukraine and Ukrainians. 2023 was the year when everybody underestimated the aggressor. And 2024 will be the moment of truth. What result this moment of truth will bring depends on the decision which our international partners make now, in the coming weeks, maximum months. I am very honored and grateful and proud that so many heads of state, governments, ministers, leaders of politics and business are here today with us to discuss how to help Ukraine to win. And I want to appeal to you at the start of this year of truth, make our discussion here a conversation of truth. Thank you very much, and for it, floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. As always, this is such an important breakfast. Unfortunately, more important because of the urgency of the situation. I think this year at Davos, somebody said, I don't know if I should quote him directly because he may not wish to be associated with this, but he said there are 3 topics at Davos this year. Artificial intelligence, which everyone pretends to understand but does not. The US election, I would add, which everyone is terrified that they understand too well. And Ukraine, which is the most pressing and urgent of all of them. So given this cavalcade of VIPs we have at both on the floor and here, let me start immediately. President Duda, it's now been 2 years since this phase of the war. The war, of course, began in 2014. How much has it already changed international order? And to what extent do you think that conditions are possible for negotiation with Russia?
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, Ladies and gentlemen, dear Ukrainian friends, we all know history, and I'm absolutely sure that we can say that after 30 years since Soviet Union collapsed, now we are witnessing the rebirth of the Russian imperialism in its bloodthirsty version. Without any doubts, Putin decided to set the world in fire. We are still witnessing the biggest armed conflict in Europe since the end of the Second World War, along with its darkest shadows, murdering of civilians, shelling of critical infrastructure, torturing of prisoners, and deportation of children, provocation of famine in many places in the world, and other forms of violation of international law. I hope you've just visited Ukraine House here in Davos to see the exhibition documenting Russian war crimes in Ukraine. This is absolutely impressive, this movie showing 691 pictures documenting day by day this terrible Russian atrocities in Ukraine. What is the most dangerous is the fact that as the war in Ukraine progresses, we are witnessing the construction of a coalition of evil, which is not only favorable to Putin, it is also ready to take actions and take the risk to ruin the global order. I agree that security model which we were trying to build since the end of the Cold War was destroyed before our eyes. The foundation of the free world, such as freedom, dignity, and individual and democracy, are eroding and have numerous enemies. Let's remember that Ukraine is fighting not just for its own sovereignty, but is also defending our democratic values. We must not forget it. The war in Ukraine is a war of great symbolic and psychological significance. If Putin prevailed in Ukraine, it would send a clear signal to the world, all his supporters, to ramp up actions aimed directly against the Western world. We should bear in mind, when we hear ever more frequent voices of fatigue with the war in Europe, we should bear it in mind. It's exactly what the rulers in the Kremlin count on our fatigue with the war in Europe. Russia has kept escalating the conflict. Moscow is convinced that time is on its side and it's ready to fight a long war attrition. It hopes that the tired West will start to limit its support for the fighting Ukraine and will push Kyiv to start peace talks. Therefore, we have to be prepared for a long march in which we will take care of the security of our citizens, support Ukraine in its struggle across the board, and help it to rebuild, also with the assets confiscated from the aggressor, because this is crucial and extremely important. In this context, the unblocking of $60 billion earmarked for the reconstruction of Ukraine by the United States and 50 billion euros by the European Union seems to be crucial. If you ask me about potential peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, my answer is very clear. It's up to the Ukrainians to decide about their own future. No other external actors should decide about it on behalf of Ukraine. The conflict would only end with Moscow's full retreat. They attacked an independent and sovereign country. They are the aggressor. The war will come to an end when we have driven Russians out of all Ukrainian occupied territories. Any other solution would mean Russia's victory. And please remember this, Russia will not stop on Ukraine. Other countries in Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia may become Russia's next victim. This is absolutely crucial. I'm absolutely sure. If Russia wins this war, if Russia wins, Russia will attack next country. This is typical for Russian imperialism. They will attack and attack again. Ukraine has to win this war, and we should do everything we can to help our Ukrainian friends. This is our obligation. We have to do that, and I hope we will do that every day till the end of this war, till Ukraine will win. Thank you.
So we have with us the two, one might say the two key countries that have been at the forefront of helping Ukraine militarily and economically, Britain and the United States. Britain in the form of David Cameron, the United States in the form of Penny Pritzker, who is the president's special representative on it. David, or I should say, my lord, as the recently ennobled David Cameron, what part of this do we not understand? Because as President Duda, as Victor said, if you want to win, surely the idea should be do as much as you can, as fast as you can, because you're already committed on this side, and doing too little seems like it places you in a situation where you, Britain and the United States' reputation will suffer.
I think that's right. I mean, I agree with so much of what President Duda said. I mean, if foreign ministers keep saying, yes, we must support Ukraine, but yes, we must also start a peace process, they'll neither get a strong Ukraine nor a peace process. But if we just get behind Ukraine and help Ukraine in this fight, that is the way, ultimately, to bring this to an end. So Britain is very clear to us, this is the struggle of our generation. This is like being a foreign minister or prime minister in the 1930s and fighting that aggression. And what we know from then is if you appease aggression, you get more of it. And that's why I'm very proud that Britain was the first to provide anti-tank weapons, the first to provide tanks, the first to provide long-range artillery, the first to provide long-range fires. We are right behind the Ukrainians in this struggle for as long as it takes. My Prime Minister was there last weekend announcing the 2.5 billion of British support for next year, and I would urge colleagues in America and in the European Union to bring forward their packages, which are obviously much larger, but will make the key difference. And the statistic to remember is that if we add up our economies, we are 25 times the size of the Russian economy. All we need to do is make our economic strength show, make it pay, and we will be able to help Ukraine bring this to a conclusion. But we have to be patient. We have to recognize Putin thinks he can sort of wait us out and we'll get impatient, we'll get fatigued. We have to show that is absolutely not the case. And to American colleagues, I would say, and I said this on Capitol Hill, I mean, so far, you've spent maybe 10% of your defense budget, and that has achieved a 50% destruction of Russia's pre-war military equipment without the loss of a single American life. That is an amazing investment in attriting the defense capability of a principal adversary. So we'll be there as long as it takes, not just militarily. We've also signed a 100-year partnership with our friends in Ukraine that covers everything from diplomacy to economy, to arts, to culture, to people links. As I say, this is the challenge of our generation. We must not be found wanting. We have the means to bring it to an end. And also, I would just sort of challenge the narrative that things are not going the right way. If you zoom out and look at this and what's actually happened, it has been a strategic disaster for Putin. He's lost half his military equipment. He's had 300,000 casualties. NATO, he's seen get bigger and stronger with the addition of 2 highly capable countries in Finland and Sweden. He's lost 20% of his Black Sea fleet to a country that only has a relatively limited navy. So I think if you zoom out and you look at the big picture, he's lost, by the way, half of the territory that he took when he invaded 2 years ago. So I think if you zoom out, you can actually see that Ukraine has been incredibly successful at pushing back Russia, and we have to stand with them for as long as it takes, show the patience, show the strength of our economies, and crucially, provide them with what is necessary. Britain is doing that. We need other countries to step forward and do more. And if we do that, we know the Ukrainians are incredibly brave, incredibly united. Someone said to me the other day, President Zelensky, his approval rating has slipped from 90% to 80%. I used to dream of an approval rating of 40%, let alone 80%. So they're a talented team of ministers. They've got the country behind them. We just need to get behind them for as long as it takes.
Well, Penny, as you know, all eyes are on the United States, and the question people ask is, of course, will the United States get more, bigger, faster to Ukraine? But also, will the political divisions in the United States make it difficult for it to provide the kind of consistent, long-term support that Ukraine needs? I wondered if you had thoughts on both those topics.
Fareed, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Pinchuk Foundation for inviting us all here together for a very important conversation. I think the United States, first of all, is committed to supporting Ukraine. We're going through our political process, which in an election year is nothing but complicated and at times ugly and messy. But there's bipartisan support in both houses of our Congress, and that's the thing that we have to remember. The challenge is timing. Things are tough in Ukraine, and our support, and thank you to the UK for moving so quickly. I think that's an important, first of all, an important ally, but also an important signal to the Ukrainians of that support is on the way. I think as it relates to strategically, this is not just a war, a military war, it's also an economic war. And if you look at what Putin is trying to, where his missiles are going and what he's attacking, it's more than just military outlets. It's very much the economic heart of Ukraine. If you look, for example, at what's happened at the Black Sea, you know, they pulled out of the grain initiative, and within 2 to 3 months, there's a new corridor up and operating. 600 ships have been through, 16 million tons of grain, more grain in the last month of December than ever in any month went through the Black Sea Grain Initiative. My point here is that the Ukrainians have been extremely resilient and flexible, along with our allies from Poland, the allies in Romania, in Moldova, etc., to make the economy continue to function, which is extremely important. And that's as relevant to me as the military war, and that's what President Biden asked me to focus on. I think that to give some credit to the Ukrainians, they're prosecuting a war, they're defending democracy for us, but they're also changing the culture of their economy. They're undertaking massive reforms. The head of their Rada, with their legislature, their parliament, basically said they're going to pass 250 more laws and changes this year, which are essential. There's a huge effort to have cultural change to move and turn their economy west as much as there is a military effort going on. And I would encourage all of us in this room, whether in business or in government, we have to get on board. The United States has to live up to its commitments to Ukraine, which I believe it will. And you know, we're there, even though at times democracy can be very messy.
Thank you, Penny. So I'd like to turn to a Ukrainian, to Ukraine's very talented, articulate Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba. Dmytro, my question to you, I suppose, would be two parts. One, what is it specifically that Ukraine needs most urgently? Help us understand what is the need right now. And secondly, you've now been at Davos, had back-to-back meetings. Are you coming out of this emboldened? Do you feel more confident? Do you feel more reassured? Or are you worried, and is there a lot more work to be done?
We are. We are encouraged, we are reassured by the meetings here in Davos and by the reception that was given to President Zelensky. His address resonated very well in the audience because he addressed the issue that stands at the core of the discussion, which is the concept of don't escalate. We've been hearing since then, day one, don't escalate here. We cannot do this because we don't want to escalate there. And so many opportunities were lost because of that. So this concept should be completely abandoned, should be removed from the decision-making process, because everything that happened in almost last 2 years proves that it's just a harmful thing to do. None of the prophecies, apocalyptic prophecies of Russian retaliation proved true. Every time a solution, the concept, the don't escalate concept was put aside and the decision was made, Russia did nothing. We should not overestimate Russia. We should not, nor should we underestimate it, but we should not overestimate Russian capacity to escalate. Answering your first question, there are two elements which I would like to mention. The first one is obviously air defense. And air defense consists of planes, consists of missiles, consists of air defense platforms and interceptors, and electronic warfare. This is a complex thing. If we protect our sky, if we throw Russia from the sky, we will be in a much stronger position to define the time when this war ends with the victory of Ukraine. The one who controls sky controls the end of the war. And I think it became pretty obvious recently. But on a broader scale, I would like to take this opportunity and address our partners. We kindly ask you to urgently, without any delay, without protracted discussions, we've had so many of them in the last years, and they all ended in your positive decisions. So eventually you still make things happen. But every day you discuss something, someone dies in Ukraine. So please, 3 things without delay. First, finally, make your technical people sit down and align your defense industries. No country on its own with the strongest defense industry can meet the needs of the war, the needs of potential wars in other places in the world, and the needs of your own security. You can achieve that only by coordinating, by working together, by ensuring that there is a certain level of cooperation among your defense industries. I know it's a very selfish sphere. I know that countries keep their defense industries very close to their heart, but the way to win is to ensure sustainability of supplies. And the way to ensure sustainability of supplies is for all of you to cooperate. Second, frozen assets. If we take frozen assets, Russian frozen assets of 3 countries, I mean in 3 countries, if we take, sorry, it's morning and I didn't have enough of coffee. If we take assets frozen in only 3 countries, Britain, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, we can repair all infrastructure damaged in Ukraine, airports, bridges, roads, everything. If we take the 180 billion of assets stored in the Euroclear in Belgium, we can have a lot of weapons. We can have a lot of recovery. We can repair hospitals, schools. Russia must pay. And we don't buy the arguments about legal constraints, about financial regulations. Guys, when you want to do something, when politicians say we need to do this, bankers and lawyers align. They find solutions because this is what they're being paid for. And there was something else, but I forgot it. So thank you.
I think it's important enough, Dimitra, that if you remember it, tell me, and we'll come back to you. Chrystia, Freeland, you have been an early and passionate advocate for Ukraine, but also you have put forward this argument early on about confiscating Russian central bank assets. And it seems to me the power of this idea is that not only does it give Ukraine money, and substantial amounts of money, it suggests that this money, it sends a signal to Putin that this money is there no matter what happens in elections in any country, let us say, over the next few years, because those assets are, in a sense, untethered from the political processes in various Western countries. Do you think we are actually getting close to doing this? Are you hopeful? Give us a kind of progress report on your discussions with finance ministers.
Okay, well, look, thank you very much, Fareed. And I think it's an important question. It's an important point. I think Dmytro has made the case very clearly. As far as Canada is concerned, already in the spring of 2022, we passed legislation giving us the authority to confiscate Russian frozen assets in Canada. We thought it was important then. We think it's even more important now because it's really, really expensive. Rebuilding Ukraine will be really, really expensive. Fighting a war is really, really expensive. And, you know, this is like mostly a security, foreign policy group. I'm a finance minister. And I can tell you that right now, Western democracies are all financially constrained. We are dealing with the debt we accumulated during COVID. All of us are investing heavily in the green transition. It makes a lot of sense, including political sense, for us to be able to say to our own people, the aggressor will pay for the damage being done to Ukraine. That's an argument I can make to Canadians, and that sounds fair to Canadians because it is. And you're absolutely right, Fareed, that it also is a very powerful disincentive to aggressors to wreck things if they're going to have to pay for it. I'd just like to say 2 other things very quickly. Speaking of the aggressor, I thought what President Duda had to say was very important. And I think, you know, because Ukraine, you know, the fight is in Ukraine right now, sometimes even as we talk about the rules-based international order, we tend to think about the threat being really a threat to Ukraine, not to the rest of us. And I just want to urgently disabuse us of that view. Secretary Cameron, Prime Minister Cameron, as I'm used to calling him, is absolutely right to say this is our 1930s moment. And I think what we have to realize, like, what does Putin want? What Putin wants is to transform the world order. To just talk about the rules-based international order, it's a little bit kind of a mild academic way of thinking about it. He wants a change. Since the Second World War, in the non-geographic West, we've had this wonderful period where the competition between nations was about who can be richer and who can help their people prosper the most. How great has that been? And that has allowed us to have win-win collaboration. We could get rich together, and we did. But Putin hates that world because he loses in that world. His system is a loser in a peaceful, global, wealth-enhancing paradigm. And so what he wants is to move us back to dog eat dog, to, a 19th century great power competition, because he thinks he can, if not win, be more effective there, because frankly, he doesn't care about human life. He doesn't care about the lives of Russians or anybody else. And I think we just need to realize that this is a threat to us all. It's a threat because a successful Russia is a danger to everybody. It's a threat also because of the demonstration effect for every other would-be, sort of dog-eat-dog player in the world. And we are already seeing other countries testing the limits. So let's not think, for those of us, Penny, who are, have an ocean between us, and I know you don't think this, that somehow this is a Ukrainian problem. This is a problem for us all. And then just in conclusion, I want to say, Victor, you started off by saying thank you. And I just want to say it is we, all of us, who should be saying thank you to the Ukrainians. It actually breaks my heart when I see Dmytro and Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister, and President Zelensky have to come to our cities and ask us for things, and have to be so grateful, and have to say thank you to us all the time. Because the reality is, we should be saying thank you to you. And you guys are magnificent. I can't believe how well you're doing. I mean, seriously, guys. Can we actually, think about 2 years ago, did we think they would do so well? Nobody thought they would do so well. I don't think the Ukrainians thought they would do so well 2 years ago. You are totally amazing. Кожен з вас герой, кожен з вас пишеться в історії України. Я надзвичайно горда вас. Щиро вам дякую і слава Україні.
Let me pick up on a point that Chrystia made, which is about the dangers not just to Ukraine, but to other countries in Europe. And I think we sometimes, we regard this as very theoretical and abstract, but I imagine that for countries that are close to Russia, this is something that is not very academic and abstract. So I was wondering if the president of Latvia would just weigh in on this topic of what do you think Putin's intentions are? How do you prepare for a possibility of an imperial Russia that has now taken on greater ambitions, were it to do well in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, thank you very much to Pinchuk Foundation, and it's a very great panel and very great audience. I think that President Duda already has very well outlined the threat to countries in the region. And what we have seen so far is that there have been a lot of discussion that Putin wants to restore the Soviet Union. Actually, his ambition goes further than that. He is dreaming about restoration of some kind of the Russian Empire of 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And this is getting much, much clearer now than even 2 years ago. The Russian propaganda apparatus, the whole hybrid warfare that we are seeing is just pointing to that end. How we are preparing? Look, on one hand, being a member of NATO and the EU provides the best security guarantee there is in the world. That's absolutely clear. But then you have to have also very real measures. There are great decisions made in Madrid and Vilnius. Our Canadian friends, Canada leads NATO battle group in Latvia, are now augmenting their forces up to the brigade level. That, of course, requires a lot of finance. There are many countries, including Poland, including many of our allies that are there. But I would say that we need to be prepared also for the kind of hybrid warfare. We see that the ally of Putin, Lukashenko, is using migration as the hybrid weapon against us, against Poland, against Lithuania. We see the constant disinformation. We now see attempts actually also to use the new technologies like artificial intelligence. Of course, cyber warfare is there. And of course, the language is getting much more threatening. However, I think that I can agree with those people who have said very much that, first of all, our first line of defense is Ukraine. And that's why we are more thankful to Ukrainians fighting now than probably they should thank us. That's number one. Number two, we have seen also quite a shift. We used to joke when we were talking with our Swedish and Finnish friends that it's time to join NATO. If you are going to do that, we are going to be your best advocates. Now, actually, that's reality. A couple of days ago, Swedish government announced that they are sending battalion size 800 soldiers to Latvia next year. And I don't remember which headline there was, but one of the Latvian websites or newspapers ran this story under the headline, "After 300 years, Swedes are back into Latvia." Because the last time they were in Latvia was at the beginning of 18th century, and that was the kind of still time that was well remembered. So we see that there are real preparation, that we take now things seriously, but we also have serious challenges. One already was outlined, defense industry. Defense industry needs to ramp up its production capacity for both reasons, to help Ukraine, but also we need much more equipment. We see that trying to buy some equipment, it takes time simply to produce that. So that's one thing. The second thing, we have reintroduced the conscription, because we understood that it's actually the only way how to deal in the long term. The third, of course, it's defense expenditure. Latvia is going to spend 3% of for defense from based on GDP by 2027. But I would say that apart from this military kind of prep work, I would also outline that we need to be prepared for all kinds of provocations, hybrid warfare. Unfortunately, we are always one or two steps behind Putin. He finds the ways how to attack us. We find the way how to counter it, but we have to be more creative. We have to understand that this guy is playing without any rules, and that is something that I sometimes don't feel when I speak with my colleagues in a broader sense at NATO or at the EU. Sometimes you have to somehow convince them that there is still a way for getting things uglier than we probably think. And that's where we are in the constant prep work.
Let me ask the Prime Minister of Croatia to tell us a little bit about what Russian activity in the Balkans, which seems to have picked up. Again, it's one of these things where it's worth listening to Putin, because sometimes he does follow up on these things, and there does seem to be, as part of, I think the President was saying, that Putin is trying to resurrect the old Russian Empire. We have a confirmation of this from a very interesting account of Sergei Lavrov, who was asked in frustration by a Kremlin insider, who is advising President Putin these days? And Lavrov, who was told of the invasion of Ukraine 2 hours before it happened, said, "Oh, I know exactly. He has three principal advisors: Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and Ivan the Terrible." So, in that context, what is there? a possibility that Russia will try, as it had in the 19th century, to have a kind of Balkan sphere?
Well, first of all, Farid, thank you for this panel and the way everything is handled, and also to Mr. Pinchuk for his invitation. If I may, just before embarking on the repercussions of Russian influence in the region where Croatia is situated, say a few points about Ukraine and the way that we see and understand the situation in the last 2 years, but even longer. My first point is that this war is actually going on for 10 years, not 2 years. We should not neglect that. There is one phenomenon that everybody seems to ignore, that Putin personally has been isolated for almost 10 years. And in reality, what was the consequence? Today, with few really rare exceptions in the West, basically you don't have any political leader who is in good terms with him or who has some sort of privileged relationship. These people are not playing the game anymore. They're out. Let us not neglect that fact, and that now stands for 10 years. Second point, the way we analyzed the Russian strategy and the narrative over the last 2 years, we saw an evolution. The first narrative was denazification of Ukraine and the questioning of the identity of Ukrainians. Are Ukrainians Ukrainians, or are they small Russians? Then we saw the narrative move to a war against a NATO proxy country. What we see today is what was said by the Canadian finance minister, is that now we are talking about the altered or new world order. And this only happened in a span of 2 years. When we link this with the forthcoming Russia's elections, which are in the middle of March, and the constitutional changes, we need to understand that the legal and political conditions have been created for another 12 years of the same Russian leader being there. No one in this room, and these are all democracies, can guarantee where he will be in terms of the will of his electorate, not in 12 years, in 2 years, 4 years, whatever it is. We should not neglect that. It's an entirely different posture at looking at processes. How does this actually affect the behavior of the West? I said yesterday at one of the panels on the Western Balkans, Putin has accelerated the enlargement of the European Union. 2 years ago, if you had asked any of my colleagues, and I remember our first debate in Versailles during the French presidency on the declaration of Ukraine, the evolution of the same people who then had difficulties in finding the right word about how do we see the European future of Ukraine, are today fervent advocates of Ukrainians' membership in the European Union. This has been a tectonic change, incredible change. Moldova opening negotiations, Georgia being granted a candidate status, Sweden and Finland abandoning decades-long policy of neutrality, joining NATO. We've seen a shift that nobody could have anticipated in such a short span of time. At the same time, when the blitzkrieg didn't work, when the impact of the energy crisis didn't work to fragilize the unity of the Western countries, now we are in the phase of the fatigue narrative. 1, 2, 3. Fatigue narrative now is something that is not convenient for Ukraine or for the West, but it's convenient for Russia. This is very clear. At the same time, the heroism of what Ukrainian people, soldiers and leadership have done over the past 2 years, it's almost inexplicable. What President Zelensky personally has done in terms of communication is unseen. Explaining what's going on every day, many times to different audiences with such a passion and such a conviction, is something that will be probably analyzed for years after the war is won by Ukraine. A small relation to Croatia. We were a country that had occupied territories for 4 plus remaining part 3 years. Nobody at the time when these territories were occupied would bet that we would ever liberate them. And we did. We managed. We found our strength, we found our allies, we prepared well, and it worked. We didn't have the same enemy at the time. The problem here is the geography, and geography that previously 2 Ukrainian regions, now 4, plus Crimea, are basically leaning on the depth of the Russian territory. And then in military terms makes it very, very difficult to regain this territory without huge victims on the Ukrainian side. And therefore, when I look at it, I would entirely agree with Minister Cameron, who said this was actually loss for Russia and a victory for Ukraine. But in order to sustain this motivation, we need to keep the unity of the West, the financial and the military support. And I'm sure on the 1st of February, whatever the legal framework, the European Union will live up to the expectations of 50 billion euros for the next 4 years of financial support to Ukraine. The atmosphere as such, we have done the decision and we'll find a legal way. It would be nice if it's within the revision of the multi-annual financial framework. If it's not, we'll find another legal solution. But the message is that standing with Ukraine, as it has been said here, is certainly going to be the solution. In the region, Russia is very active now, but I wouldn't say that at this stage we are at the verge of some sort of a destabilization that would derail the focus of the Western countries even more than it is now occupied with the Hamas-Israel situation. Thank you.
Thank you, President Plenković. Let me ask, I see Radek Sikorski in the, at the table here, Foreign Minister of Poland. Radek, you were formerly the defense minister. You have, as a private citizen, you raised, you put together arms packages and delivered them personally to the Ukrainians, so you know this conflict very well. I want to ask you this question that is asked a lot in the West and in America, which is, shouldn't the Ukrainians transition to some kind of negotiation, recognizing that militarily it's going to be very hard for them to get back the roughly 20% of their territory that they have lost, and that, you know, the best thing to do would be to take what you have and build a free and independent Ukraine anchored in the West, start some kind of negotiation process. How would you respond to that idea?
Well, thank you for giving me the floor and referring to the effort that we run from Poland. And I appeal to everyone, if you have a spare $10,000 and you want to sponsor a pickup truck that will be delivered directly to the front line to the soldiers that need it, I know the man who does it. He's delivered 200 of them already. I took part in 3 of those trips, and it's great effort that is appreciated on the front line. As regards negotiations, let me share with you one of the Sikorsky laws of foreign policy. There is never a shortage of pocket chamberlains willing to sacrifice other people's land or freedom for their own peace of mind. And we shouldn't do it. I will use a risque comparison, but you know, if a woman is being raped, it's not the best time to tell her, don't escalate or negotiate. You have to come to her assistance. And so what happens in the occupied territory? What happens to the Ukrainian citizens who are being forcibly Russified, who are being tortured, whose children are getting stolen? These are sacrifices that Ukraine is making, not us. And therefore, it is only up to Ukraine to make those judgments.
We have, I think, a few more foreign and defense ministers in the audience, so I thought I would take the opportunity. I believe the Minister of Defense of the Netherlands is with us. Yeah, there. Guys, Ollongren, let me ask you about this issue of weaponry and training. You're helping with the aircraft that Ukraine needs. But again, it seems as though, at least when I talk to my Ukrainian friends, it's taking too long. Is there anything that can be done to speed it up?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Good to see so many people in a room. And I think when you host Friends of Ukraine, it's difficult to find a room big enough. And that's good news. So on your question, when we meet as ministers of defense in the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, we need a room this size. And we need a very big table, bigger than Putin's table, which he sat at alone. And that is why Ukraine has so many friends that they can rely on, and friends that have the budget, with ministers of finance that no is not an answer, with ministers of defense that have dug very deeply into their own stocks, and that are now engaging with industry and doing procurement directly for Ukraine and joint procurement directly for Ukraine. And yes, we have to step up our efforts. Because when we promised Ukraine to have 1,155 artillery shells by the 1st of March this year, that was a promise. We know it was ambitious, but it was a promise. And we have to keep that promise. And that means that we have to ramp up production, that we have to find ways to open new production lines, to find a solution for the labor shortages and for the raw material shortages that there are. But we have to remember that no is not an answer. And you mentioned the F-16s and the F-16 coalition. And I think we were all realistic, and Ukraine was also realistic when we talked about this. Because this is a major change for the Ukrainian Air Force. It's a completely different capability to what they're used to. You have to have pilots who know how to fly it, but also know how to fight with it. You have to have the maintenance personnel. You have to have the infrastructure in Ukraine. So yes, it's going to take time, but we're getting there. And the Ukrainians have always amazed us in every training that we've given them, from the very basic military training to the very sophisticated trainings on F-16s and other capabilities that we have within NATO. They're learning at a double pace from what we're used to. And I think that what we are seeing here this morning and yesterday and every time that I visit Ukraine is this extreme motivation that Ukraine has. And what I feel is important is to say that Ukraine is a European country, not only by geography, but also by conviction, because we share the same values. And the dream that Ukraine has of being a free and democratic country, belonging to the European family, becoming a member of the European Union, is something that people in the European Union sometimes forget. But this is their dream, and I think it is our duty to help them to get there and to win this war. Thank you. Thank you.
David Cameron, I know you have to leave, but I thought before you go, I wanted to get your thoughts on this very important point that Dmytro made about the alignment of European defense capabilities if you are really going to fight this in the long run. I mean, during World War II, it really took almost a kind of joint command structure. You had to create supreme allied commanders and all of that. Is it realistic to hope that the Western world will really be able to come together in the way that it would be required on defense?
I think it is, but I think it's definitely the area where the greatest amount of attention is needed. I mean, what countries like Britain and France and others and Poland have been doing so far is, really going through our own inventory and working out what we can give, and we've been as generous and expansive as we can be. We've also bought up a huge amount of legacy era Soviet equipment from around the world to resupply the Ukrainians with. But I think this coordinating production with multi-year contracts and really demonstrating that we're in this for the long term, it is one of the most important outcomes we need of meetings like this. I would just mention a couple of other things that finance ministers, foreign ministers, prime ministers can all do. One is we've all put in place these sanctions on Russian individuals and entities to stop feeding Putin's war machine. But we've got to police them as well as putting them on. We've got to make sure that third countries aren't going around these sanctions. We've now sanctioned entities and individuals in countries as far apart as China and the Central Asian republics and even countries nearer to home. So not just putting in sanctions isn't enough. I think also every country can look at its security guarantees and agreements it's going to sign with Ukraine. We just signed ours last week. Every country should do that, so it's clear about the assistance that Ukraine would get in any future conflict. I think if we do all of those, and obviously being here at Davos with so many people in the private sector, I think every company should be asking itself, not only have I stopped doing business with Russia, but also asking what business can I do with Ukraine? And foreign ministers like me need to look at the travel advice. And it's no good saying to business, go to Ukraine and invest. This is a brilliant economy with incredibly talented people. We've got to make sure it's actually possible to get there to invest and to help grow their economy. So there's a whole series of actions coming out of this meeting and other meetings that can be taken. But you're right, defense coordination and production is probably the most important.
We have the foreign minister of Lithuania here as well. Foreign Minister Landsbergis, let me ask you, do you worry that that an emboldened Putin would have designs on Lithuania? These are the, these were typically described often as the most indefensible of the states in Europe, and that was, why in some ways they were conceded in de facto but never de jure during the Cold War. Give us a sense of what does the world look like from your perspective?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Truly, it's great to see. Is it just me, or the group is growing every year? Honestly, I would start from the joyous fact that whenever I'm listening to the group of friends of Ukraine, I can say that we're on the same page. We're committed. We have been committed from the first day. And I hope that we will continue doing that. There are a couple of things that could be added, especially since we are on the same page. First of all, I think it would be good, and speaking about the messages to Putin, to commit not just to as long as it takes, but change the it to victory, and change to whatever it takes. I think that's a very strong deterring message to Vladimir Putin. The second thing is equipment. Again, we're talking all the right things, and I hope I won't spoil the party. We're saying all the right words. We're committed, we've sent that much, we're planning to send even more. But I can give you one example. There's a very friendly country, very close to Lithuania, who is taking their defense extremely seriously. That's Poland. And they've been doing that for as long as I can remember. So now they have orders for the equipment. If I'm not mistaken, about 1,000 tanks from the United States, Abrams tanks, about 500 HIMARS systems, and about 40 Patriot systems. Poland is roughly the same size, the same population as Ukraine. And Poland has the Article 5. So it gives you an idea what a military planner is planning to have in case Russia attacks. Not 40 HIMARS, 400, not 80 tanks, 1,000. So this is what we need to pledge if we are committed to the first fact that we want to win. And now, and last point on this, the cost. Absolutely right. This is all about money. But it's also about the element, the level of shock and understanding of how historic the situation is. And we've been there in a similar situation just a couple of years ago. It was different, but similar in the sense that we were shocked. It was called COVID. And Europe bonded together and pledged 700 billion euros to recover from COVID, because it was that important. We managed to do that. We managed to recover, and we're quite okay with this. So when somebody's saying now that we're unable, it's too tough, it's impossible, I'm saying we're just not taking it seriously enough, unfortunately. So now the last question, and answering, last point and answering your question. We have to ask ourselves a question. What kind of message are we sending to Putin? Are we deterring or are we inviting? And this is where the anxiety of the Baltic states and most likely Poland comes from. The problem is that we don't feel that Putin is deterred enough. that without saying the 3 points that I've mentioned at the beginning, he thinks that we might falter, that maybe we don't want to win, maybe we won't send the equipment, and maybe we won't finance it enough. So let's fix the first 3 points, and I think that he won't attack anybody else. Thank you so much.
The Foreign Minister of Norway is here, and let me first ask the Foreign Minister of Norway. I think as a percentage of GDP, you've probably provided more assistance than almost anybody. Do you believe that Europe can keep spending on the rate it needs to be able to do this? Is there some mechanism that needs to be put in place that ensures this?
Yes, Farid, I think we can, and I know that we must. And it's true that Norway is one of the big 5 in absolute numbers and the number 1 in relative numbers, and I'm proud of that. But on the other hand, we also earned a lot of extra income because of the energy crisis, so we thought it was useful to put some of that back into this fight. 5-year plan, $7 billion program, civilian and military. One of the key things we provide is the NASAMS and AMRAAMs for the air defense, because as Dimitri correctly says, you need to control the skies. And if Ukraine does not control its own skies, you will have a very negative development. So it's an incredibly proud nation fighting incredibly hard, but you really also need the technology. And one point I want to underline is that one question is money. The other way is how we use that money. And we throw money at defense procurement now. But the problem is that the next round of weapons are put just after the existing orders. We need to enhance our simultaneous capacity to produce more of the most crucial weapons. And this is a discussion that is ongoing in NATO. How can we ramp up our defense industries? Because as David was saying earlier, our combined GDP is 25 times higher. Our technological level is way higher than the Russian, but we have to get the act together to use the money smartly. The other thing I'd like to mention is that we've taken a particular role on the energy sector. Because to help Ukraine to become energy independent and to repair the energy systems that are being destroyed by Russian attacks quickly is something that we can do, because we have some similarities in systems, and we also really want to focus on that. And the third thing, of course, is to help encourage people to think about future investments in Ukraine, because they're not only going to win the war, but they also should be taking their place as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe. Last thing I'd like to, since I have the floor, is I'd like to say that 15, 20 years ago, the only thing we did in NATO was what we called out of area and non-Article 5. And some of us, Edgar, some of us took the initiative in NATO to say maybe interstate war may again occur in Europe. And some of our friends said, no, we don't think so. That's for history. Maybe we should reorganize some territorial commands. I think we should be very happy that we did just that we actually raised the awareness that classical war between states is not only a thing for the history books, it can still happen. And if we hadn't made that move, I think we would be in a much worse shape right now. Thank you.
Chrystia, I know you wanted to comment, but if you're going to say something, I want to ask you, to press you on this issue of, is this money, the central bank money, going to be confiscated and used? You made the case very passionately as to why it should be, but based on your discussions with other governments, is it happening?
So Canada, we think, has $134. I guess the Russians didn't think Canada was a welcome place for their money. That's not a bad thing from our point of view. We are acting as we can. We believe that the moral case, the political case, and the legal case is strong, but we really recognize that this has to be something that allies do together, and that allies have to come to their own conclusions. A challenge of being democracies is that we take decisions democratically, and we follow laws, and we all need to be convinced in our own countries laws are being followed. It means democracy can be slow. But it also means when democracies and when democratic allies act together, they're more effective and they're in it for the long term. So we really recognize, the White House has now come out clearly on this issue. I'm glad to hear European allies coming out clearly, but we really recognize that it's important for particularly the countries that have the assets to come to their own conclusions, and we're supportive of that. But what I wanted to say is, listening to all of us, this is a very pleasant conversation, right? We all broadly agree about everything, as the Lithuanian minister said, so that's nice. But I think we need to be honest that this is not the only room where conversations are happening. And what I would like to urge us to do is recognize the power of narrative and the power of the story that we are telling our own people. Putin, and we heard this from the Prime Minister of Croatia, Putin thinks he's going to win. And he thinks that he's going to win because he thinks democracy is a dictatorship is stronger than democracy. He really believes it. He thinks he is strong and we are weak. He thinks everybody on this stage is subject to democratic elections. We're not going to be here in 12 years. He has endurance, we don't. I think what we have to really believe ourselves and what we have to talk about with our own people is, I think democracy can win. I think democracy is better. And we have to really believe that, and we have to recognize that Ukraine's victory, and I again agree with Lithuania, let's talk about Peremoha as the objective. That victory is a very important point. This is a decision point for the whole world. And I think if we understand it that way, it helps us to get to Peremoha, and it helps us to understand why that's so important.
Let me transition to something slightly different, which is I'd like to hear from two Ukrainians who have been in combat and just get their sense of their perspective on what they've been listening to. Maria Nazarova is a combat medic for the National Association of Emergency Medical Technicians, a tactical medical instructor. And I'd love to, Maria, just tell us, you've been listening here. What does it all sound like to you? What would you like to say to this group?
Good morning. My name is Maria. I will be turning 28, and I joined the forces in 2014 when the war started, when I was 18. And you may have some pity for that or thought that it could be some wasted youth, but it's not. I had all the normal things like any of you can relate. I had first love, learning how to drive, getting medical education, and it was all with the army, in the army, and during the war. And it's not any wasted opportunity, because I have been doing what I do best as a combat medic, and I have been doing what is best for my country. I have been doing justice for generations of my people that have been tortured, killed, whose assets have been taken from them, who were starved, who were sent to concentration camps by empires, by communists, by Soviet Union. And I'm doing justice for them for the first time in history, because it's the first time that we have our own army, backed by our democratic government, having support from the whole Western world, because we are doing justice right now. And it could never been a better moment in history for us. It could not been better youth for me being a part of that thing. So please don't waste your opportunity. When we and hundreds of thousands of my brothers and sisters in arms are providing that, there are many more, much more heroic than I do. I'm the person that a wounded patient calls for, but we don't always go there because we train them well in self and body aid. There are more people here that have been doing much more heroic things. So please don't waste that opportunity that we have given to the whole world to fight the empire, to fight the evil. This is the justice that we are serving right now, and justice is 155 millimeters. Justice will soon fly F-16s. Justice is an FPV drone assembled by Ukrainian volunteer at home. Justice is us, and if you're helping Ukraine, you're serving justice. So thank you for doing that, and please don't ever stop, because we did not stop through our whole youth, and we will not ever stop until the evil is defeated. Thank you all, and Slava Ukraini!
Thank you, Maria. And let's now hear from Alexander Batalov, who is a gunner medic in the Armed Forces of Ukraine, who's right here up front.
Всім доброго ранку. Мене звуть Олександр Баталов. Я стрілець-санітар.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alexander Batalov. I'm a gunman medic. I used to be a civilian person. I was a masseur. I worked in a salon, and I loved my work. But when my country needed me, in order to ensure that we can protect our country, I joined the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and I served honestly unless I was wounded 6 months ago. I worked with my unit close to Bakhmut, and upon being wounded, I stayed for 6.5 hours on the field because I couldn't be medevaced. You should understand how difficult it is when you are lying under the shelling for 6.5 hours and nobody can help you, nobody can salvage you from there. And the only thing that inspired me then was my thought of my wife and my family. Our families, our wives, our parents, our children give us the strength to stand tall, to move forward, to fight for every meter of our territory, not only to fight for the freedom, because freedom is not a word to us. It's being with our families, in our cozy homes, walking in the street with our children and enjoying life. So every dollar of your support to Ukraine is extremely important. To us military, it is absolutely existential, absolutely critical. We would not surrender. To us, our families, our children, and our wives are top priority, and we would be fighting as long as we are alive in order to protect them. But with your support, we would do that more effectively, quickly. And when you go hiking or go sunbathing, remember about us. I've lost my leg, but I haven't lost my honor, honesty, my willingness to continue living. I will be hiking in the future, I'm sure. I will be enjoying summer with my sisters and brothers in arms, and I will enjoy life. Thank you very much. Stand with Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine.
These are extraordinary people, and I'm so glad we had a chance to hear from them. You should know there are many more, as Maria was saying. We just have an opportunity to hear from two. David Rubenstein, at last year's breakfast, I think it was you said to the group here, your children and grandchildren will ask you 20, 30, 40 years from now, what were you doing in the cause for Ukraine's freedom? You thought it was that central to each of our stories and destinies. I want to ask you to reflect on where you think we are now, and particularly to reflect as an American, because you know how nervous everybody is, obviously centrally the Ukrainians, about whether American support could waver come November.
Well, I would say that it's obviously a difficult situation in the United States because of the politics of this situation. We all know that if President Trump were to be reelected, he is probably not as big a supporter of Ukraine as all of us would wish. I do think, though, that the business community and others in the United States can influence him by putting some pressure on him. And I think we shouldn't view that as a lost cause, nor should we view it as a certainty that he'll get elected. Let me just make two other points, though, briefly. One is that in the long history of European wars, every country under attack has asked other countries to provide military troops. In this one case, Ukraine hasn't asked the United States to send military troops, hasn't asked England or hasn't asked France. And so we all are in debt to Ukraine for not asking us to send troops. We're sending other things, and hopefully it can be helpful. But the idea that Ukraine is trying to do this on its own, with its own military troops, its own personnel, is a testament to the courage of the Ukrainian people, and we applaud them for that. Second point is that I probably am a minority in the people in this room. I believe a Ukraine-Russian combination would be a good thing under Ukrainian control. And just think about this someday. If the courage that Ukraine has shown and its commitment to democracy and its commitment to freedom were to be imbued in the Russian people, and someday, and Ukraine were to control Russia, the world would be a better place. Thank you.
I noticed that Wolfgang Schmidt is here. Am I right? I think I see. Wolfgang, would you give us some of your thoughts on what is going on from the perspective of your country? You are at the center of Europe.
Yeah, geographically. So, as you know, we are steadfast in our support for Ukraine. So we are now, by far, I think, the largest supporter in Europe, and we will continue to doing so. I think the question of materials, so ammunition and weapon system, is crucial. That's what we need to industrialize that. So that's where our strong defense industry is in close contact with us to make sure that Ukraine gets what it needs. And financially, it was mentioned that I think we all need to ramp up our support because we all know that this is the signal that Putin needs. And we do hope for a better outcome of the US election, but we need to prepare for an outcome that might reduce financial support for Ukraine. So that is what we are doing. You know, the Chancellor has called several European leaders, asking them also to ramp up their support, and we will continue so. We need to monitor what everybody is doing so to have a better overview and so that we can put gentle pressure on each other to do more. That's what we will do.
Thank you, Wolfgang. We have time for one more comment, and I just thought I would return. We have to close this with the Ukrainian, and I thought, Dmytro, give us your final thoughts. What is Ukraine's plan for the next few months? What will you be doing?
The plan is simple: to fight, to win, to put gentle pressure, as Wolfgang eloquently said, on France. There is one more thing. So everything that was said in this room is important. I think there is one more element that I want to add to it. In almost every piece of Russian weaponry, including missiles, that we intercept or capture on the ground, produced in the last 2 years, there is a number of Western spare parts. Some argue that up to 95% of the state-of-the-art Russian weapons come from the West. And it's not because the sanctions regime is bad, it's because they built business schemes, great business schemes, to bypass sanctions. The West has the best financial intelligence in the world. I do not believe the West has no capacity to track these schemes, to close them, because you are paying twice. First, you are paying for Russian to help Ukraine recover from Russian attacks financially, and second, you pay politically and in terms of your reputation when Ukraine is being destroyed with the weapons that fly and shoot because your spare parts are available to Russia. So this is another very important area that I would like to focus on. And finally, very briefly, you know, Chamberlain was not a bad man. Winston Churchill had a long record of failures in politics and war before the Second World War. But what separates Chamberlain from Churchill is just one decision. And every politician today is facing the same dilemma and will go down in history either in the basket of Chamberlain, and it doesn't matter how good you were, or in the basket of Churchill. And everyone should remember that some generations of politicians, they are lucky, I think, because they live in the times where all they have to do is just to manage history. But luckily or not, this generation of politicians in Ukraine and elsewhere makes history. And we bear responsibility before future generations for decisions we make today. Thank you.
And with that, the annual Davos Ukrainian Breakfast is over. Next year, we will be back, hopefully with better news.